Well, hello everyone. This is a lot of great stuff happening in the family of One Life. My name is Ben Stewart, and I'm the Executive Director of Uncharted International. And the leadership of One Life wanted to, as we continue, just take a moment and honor and hear from some really special guests that we have in town this weekend. This is Peter and Rebecca Tang, all the way from Myanmar. Through Uncharted, One Life is a key supporter and friend and partner of the work that Peter and Rebecca are doing. And so we just wanted to take a moment and let you guys hear from them. So Peter and Rebecca, they lead one of the main orphanages in Myanmar called Love Children's Home. And they also help oversee and facilitate a network of orphanages scattered throughout the whole country of Myanmar. And so we wanted to just take a second to hear from you, Peter, about why is this ministry so significant in terms of the effect and the impact it's having on the kids and the families and the communities in Myanmar.
Actually, Myanmar is one of the poorest countries in the world. And in Myanmar, in 1995, the time that we start our ministry, there were lots of poor and orphans in our country. The orphans, the poor, they beg by the street and they just die. Some of them die by the street. So I and Rebecca started our ministry called Love Children Home in 1995 to save them, to give them shelter, those who have no shelter, and to give them hope, those who have no hope, and they may have life and have it abundantly. That is the reason we started in 1995 for our orphanage in Myanmar.
Awesome. Awesome. And talk a little bit about the connection with One Life Church. Uncharted is set up in such a way where we are trying to connect churches here in the West to different ministries and kingdom initiatives in different parts of the world, especially ones that are typically forgotten and overlooked. So you have a great relationship and partnership with One Life Church. Can you talk briefly about why is that important?
It is very important to support us in many ways, prayers, financial, and any way you can, sending teams. Because the children, as I said, they were on the street and they never feel they have the person who loves them. So you send the team, One Life send the team through Uncharted. The children, when they hug and share love, the children have confidence in their life and they think they are counted among the people. And so important for your gift, sponsor child that changed Myanmar, not only the orphans. The reason we start the orphanage is to train the orphans and send them back to their native and change the whole Myanmar. So you guys are the one who changed Myanmar and who step into the vision that God gave us, not only giving life to the kids, but to change Myanmar. So we need you, and thank you so much for your prayer support, your financial support, and your sponsor of a child is so big for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's awesome. Peter and Rebecca, I want you to know that we are proud to be your friends and to support you and to partner you with you guys and what you're doing. And just a few quick calls to actions that are all very simple but very profound. And the main one is what Peter just said, to just keep praying for these guys. Especially right now, it doesn't take long to scroll through international news and see that the country of Myanmar has a lot of more than typical strife and challenges going on right now. So please pray for them as they have an opportunity to really bless people who are impacted by that. The second is we are offering a special, unique trip just for One Lifers. This March, led by Natalie Jaranowski, and we have extended the open registration for that through today. And so you can go on the One Life app under events and find out more about that. We would love for a great team from One Life to form and head on over and hang out with these guys. And then finally, tonight at 5 o'clock at Uncharted, we have an open house to hang out with these guys. And at 5:30, a little bit more of a program to learn about the sponsorship program. We would love to have you guys there. So Peter and Rebecca, thanks again for your ministry.
Thank you so much, and God bless you. God bless
We are
you.
going to continue now with our series called Shadows by hearing from our lead pastor, Bret Nicholson.
Well, hey, One Life campuses, I'd like to start by adding my voice to what you just saw with Peter and Rebecca and what's going on in Myanmar, and especially the trip that's coming up. If you've been around here for very long at all, you may have heard me say, because I've said it through the years, I believe every single Christ-following person who identifies that way ought to go on at least one true cross-cultural mission trip at least once in their life. I believe the multi-dimensional impact that it has on your life is incalculable, really. And as your pastor, I would encourage you for your development and everything else, please do that. And there's still time to get in. We're assembling a great team. Looks like it's going to be a lot of fun and just really, really good stuff. It will change your life in positive ways. Plus, it keeps us in touch with the nations. That's what that's all about. Jesus said to reach the nations, and we want to do that, and we have great opportunities in Myanmar, so please take advantage of that. Have you ever read a book that later you saw it was turned into a movie? And you went to the movie and you're like, come on, man, that wasn't nearly as good as the book. I think that happens about 9 out of 10 times. I've seen like one movie that I thought was actually better than the book, but usually the movies aren't as good as the book because, I don't know what it is, they leave out details, they'll make decisions about dropping certain characters or certain storylines or whatever else, and you just get frustrated. Your own imagination interacts with the story. Well, the story that we're going to be talking about today has been converted to film for one thing, but it's also been converted into a very famous and often performed Broadway musical called Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. I was reading where there's been as many as 22,000 separate productions of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, everything from high school theaters to civic theaters to different off-Broadway plays and everything else. And it's been done as movies as well. And the reason is because it's a great story. It really, really, really is. And my encouragement to all of you, we're going to handle the story today. We're going to do it in very thumbnail sketch form. If you have never just read the story of Joseph in the Bible, starting at Genesis chapter 37, please do that this week. And especially, I don't know if you knew this or not, but our goal in this series we're calling Shadows is hopefully at the end, you will be inspired and helped to get into the Bible for yourself. And I was thinking about this, that one strategy is for those of you who just love a good story, just read stories like that. Just start off. You don't get into the Bible, read the great stories, the classic stories, the David and Goliath and the Daniel and the Lion's Den, or the story of Joseph. And what you'll find is the movie's pretty good, the Broadway musical's pretty good, but it's nothing like the actual story. Now here's another reason we're going to do the story of Joseph today. It also illustrates, if you do get into the Bible for yourself, kind of how to get into the Bible. And that's really the outline that I'm going to follow today, because here's how you want to get into the Bible for yourself, especially for the Old Testament, which is where we're focusing during the Shadows series. Number one, you want to go get in the time machine, is kind of what I like to call it. When you go into a Bible story, just immerse yourself in the characters. Try to imagine yourself, picture yourself getting in a time machine, going there and watching it. Because your first responsibility is just to listen to what the author has to say, to what the story's really doing. Pay attention to the details. The second thing, and this is the second thing we're going to do today, is watch for the shadows. Watch for the shadows, because Jesus himself, and that's what this whole series is about. Jesus said the entire Old Testament was pointing to him, always pointing to him. And we're leading up to Christmas with that, because that's how the Bible leads up to the birth of Jesus. And then thirdly, apply to your life. Apply to your life. Now, I found a great passage. It's found in Romans chapter 15 that kind of shows how to do that and how that works. Listen to what Paul says to the Roman people. He says, for everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. Did you hear that? Teaching, endurance, encouragement, and adding up to hope. What I know is that some people across all three campuses, maybe a lot of people, maybe your hope has dissipated just a little bit. If the fuel tank of your hope has gone down, I can't think of hardly any other story in the entire Bible that's better for filling it back up than the story of Joseph. And what you're supposed to do and apply to your life is God's trying to teach you endurance. He's trying to encourage you. He's trying to give you hope through instruction. So I want you to hear the story of Joseph fresh in that way. Again, just getting in the time machine as we look at it. We're going to look at the shadows. And finally, we're going to see. And my goal is that everybody will walk out more filled with hope than when they came in. So here's how we're going to do this. I would break down, just like a Broadway musical, movies are this way anyway. All movies are 3-act plays. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break Joseph's story down into a 3-act play. Now I'm taking for granted some of you know this story very, very well. Some of you know it sort of okay. Some of you don't really know it much at all. And so I want to go ahead and just act as if most of us don't have a lot of familiarity with it. And I am going to give you a spoiler alert here. You've had 3,000 years to get to the end of it, okay? So here's how basically the story goes. It starts off, there's a guy named Joseph. He's 17 years old. He has some dreams that God's going to do great things. And then his life goes pretty much down the toilet, okay? It just goes from bad to worse, from bad to worse to bad to worse. But God uses that process to where he ends up is he becomes the prime minister of Egypt. And what took him down where he didn't want to be was he was betrayed by his own brothers. And later on, when he becomes the prime minister of Egypt, he encounters his brothers. So that's where we're going, and try to follow along here. So the Act 1, I would name it this: love of the father, hatred of the brothers. Love of the father, hatred of the brothers. Here's how the book of Genesis records it in chapter 37. This is the account of Jacob's family line. That's Joseph's dad. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel, also known as Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and get this, could not speak a kind word to him. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. So we're not going to read the part about the dream. Let's kind of talk about that. But okay, so get the setting. You got a 17-year-old kid, and his brothers hate him. And they hate him for a few reasons. Hopefully you picked up on this. Number one, did you pick up that he was a tattletale? Okay, no one likes a tattletale. I had brothers, especially my brothers, didn't like it. He brought their father a bad report about them. You know, so already you're like, really, kid? And he was the youngest of his 10 brothers ahead of him. He had one younger brother. So he brings their father a bad report. So they don't like him for that reason. But here's what I love. It openly acknowledges that the dad loves him more than the others. My kids, when they've come to me, I have 3 kids, and they've each taken turns coming to me and saying, who's your favorite? And I always say, you are. It's an easy answer. And for each one, I just say, you are. That's how you answer that, in case you're wondering. Parents, you know, that way they get together later. When he said it was me. You know, so the brothers are standing around, they're kind of watching the treatment. You know, he gets a car for his 16th birthday, and the others get like gift cards or something like that. They're picking up. I think dad actually loves this guy more than he loves us. And then the dad confirms it. They're like, nah, that's not true. The dad confirms it. He basically says, yeah, I pretty much do love him more than I love the rest of you. He confirms it by giving him an ornate robe. Now, that's where the Technicolor Dreamcoat thing came from. Did you notice Peter from Myanmar, his jacket a while ago? That's what it looked like. It was the exact thing. We always wonder what the coat of many colors was. It's like every time I see Peter, he walks into that jacket, I'm like, you have made us all feel underdressed, man. It's just, he has a Technicolor Dreamcoat on. That's what he looked like. So his father gathers them all around and says, hey, look at this. And they're all like, what the heck? Dad loves him more than the rest of us. They don't like that. And then to top it all off, it says he had a dream. And here's what his dream was in summary form. I dreamed you all were bowing down to me. Now again, I have brothers, and I know how they would respond to that. So they hate him. And not only that, did you notice that it noted that it says they could not speak a kind word to him? So at every dinner table gathering, at every basketball game out in the backyard, no one can say anything nice to him, so they hate his guts. So that's the intro. Love of the father, hatred by the brothers. Okay, Act 2. Act 2, I would label injustices experienced, integrity held. Injustices experienced, integrity held. So, life's going on. He's 17 years old. The brothers are out. They're working out in the fields. They're miles and miles away. Joseph's at home, apparently just kind of, playing Xbox or whatever he was doing. He didn't have to go out in the fields. Finally, the dad says, hey, I want you to go check on your brothers. He comes from a distance, and they can see him from the distance, and they probably can see him because of that coat he's got on. They know exactly who's coming. And they're sitting around, and someone starts saying, remember, they hate him. They don't just dislike him, and he's not only annoying. They hate him, and someone brings up the idea, let's just kill him. Let's just kill him right here. Think about that. Now, they're out in the middle of nowhere for one thing, and they're on a frontier kind of environment. I've read a couple different articles where they have this problem in Alaska. People move to Alaska to be in very remote places, and they know that murders, rapes, and all that kind of stuff is happening, but you can't get in, can't call 911 real easy in the middle of, in a cabin in the mountains somewhere. So they've got a problem. So they're out in a remote area. They can kill them if they want to. Now, one of the brothers, the oldest brother of all, his name is Reuben, he kind of catches on this, and he's like, no, don't be killing him. Here, throw him in this pit over here. And they throw him in an empty cistern, and he didn't like him, but he throws him in a pit. And the Bible records that Reuben wanted to come back later and get him out and send him home. But somehow Reuben's out. He's probably the one actually doing some work. The rest of them are kind of plotting and everything. And then finally another brother, his name is Judah, says this. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? What will we gain? That's an interesting question. Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. And I love his rationale. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Now, for this little scene, I want to fast forward, and I'm going to read a verse that's taken much later, 20 years after this event. Joseph has become that prime minister. And his brothers are there before him, and they have bowed down, just like the dream said. And and they don't know who he is, though. They don't recognize him, and he overhears them talking because he's been kind of messing with their minds, as you can kind of imagine. They think they're in huge trouble. And there's something very insightful about this moment that we just read about that I think is very important. Listen to what it says. They said to one another, this is the brothers talking, this is in Genesis 39, surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. 20 years later, they pictured him at that moment. Now, the reason I think that's so important to bring up, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of guilty of it. Joseph is presented a little bit as an arrogant kid, when he's 17, and he did something, he was a tattletale and all that, but he's presented the rest of the story as a stellar guy. He is a very admirable character throughout the rest of the story, very godly man. And if I'm being honest, sometimes when I read the Bible, I project on people like that either a very stoic personality, that's how they react to things, nothing really gets to them, or they're just, annoyingly optimistic, kind of godly people. In other words, when he was sold into slavery, my picture is, well, God will be my strength, and I'm walking off, and he will bless me, and he will curse thee, kind of one of those things, super spiritual kind of thing. But what I love about that is that's not how it went down. 20 years after the fact, those brothers could still see his face. It says he pleaded with them for his life. He pleaded with them. He begged them, please don't do this. And those caravans, these weren't cars that picked you up and drove you away. It would have been a very slow walk off. We'd have heard his screams. They would have seen his face. And they carried that with them. And as soon as something bad happened, they thought, it's because of our brother. It's because we heard those pleas and we didn't have mercy on him. Pretty interesting scene. Then, that's the first injustice. So, he goes. His next move is he's sold, and he ends up in a house that, he ends up in a house of a man by the name of Potiphar. And Potiphar, it says, is the captain of the guard. I've heard some people translate that, and I think this may be accurate. There's several scholars that translated it. It's not really captain of the guard. It means chief of the executioners. That's who buys him. Can you imagine? You show up in that house, chief of the executioners, and you're just trying to make small talk. So what do you do for a living, man? And then I'm working for you. I kind of want to know. Oh, yeah, I execute people kind of every day. You watch out the backyard. There they go. And he's like, oh, okay, great. But so he's sold to the chief of the executioners. But Joseph, somewhere between that horrible, horrible moment and arriving in Egypt in Potiphar's house, he kind of gathers himself and he does what hopefully all of us would do, is like, oh, Lord, okay, I don't understand why that has happened, but you're all I have now. You're all I have. Please help me, strengthen me. And he starts doing his best and he starts living before God, and Potiphar sees it. And he blesses the house of Potiphar, and everything's going awesome, and he's doing a wonderful job, and Potiphar gives him more, puts him in charge of his whole house. And so things start picking up a little bit, even though it's a horrible thing. But then the next thing that happens, the next injustice, is Potiphar's wife looks at him. And listen how the Bible says it. I like these lines because it's just true life, and again, good movie stuff. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. Probably the other reason his brothers did not like him very much. It's like, why does he get, he probably sang good too, And after a while, his master's wife took notice and said to Joseph, come to bed with me. She was kind of a direct kind of gal, right? It was just kind of, didn't flirt around a lot, just kind of come to bed with me. That's, there's something about this though. If you're, and this is somehow how we think, so he's been propositioned by this guy's wife. And if you go through an injustice in your life, if you've ever gone through something like this, you've been sold into slavery by your brothers, gone to different culture, different language, different everything, you've lost home, you've lost everything for no good reason. Sometimes if we let those kind of times get to us, it would have been very, very easy to just justify it, right? Why not? You ever done that before? I went through a terrible situation. If you've ever been through an unjust suffering, it's very much one of those things that make you bitter at life, bitter at God, bitter at people, and you think life owes. I found out that life's not fair, and I'm just gonna, okay, if it's not fair, then I'm not gonna be fair either. I'm not gonna hold my integrity. I'm just gonna do what's before me. So he could have, no one's watching or anything. But here's the marker of Joseph's life that I want you to keep your eyes on, that he lives as unto God. He lives as unto God. You may have heard integrity defined as who you are when no one is watching. I tweak it just a little bit. It's who you are when you know only God is watching. And he would make his decisions based on that. And so he rebuffs her and he says, listen, I can't do this thing against God. I can't do this thing against my master. And so he rebuffs her, and she concocts a story where she says he tried to rape her. And goes to her husband, chief executioner, by the way. But here's another thing that scholars and commentators have pointed out. And we don't know this. The Bible doesn't say this, but some have speculated. He throws Joseph in jail to honor his family and to keep from his own shame. But in his culture, he had every right to put him to death, right there in the backyard. He was the guy that would do that kind of stuff. And they find it very noteworthy that he doesn't put him to death. But he still throws him in prison. But think about this. So you've been sold into slavery. You're living before God the way you ought to live. You're doing all the right things, and things go from bad to worse. And he ends up in prison. And I'm sure he didn't handle that stoically either. I'm sure he bowed on his knees, because later on in the story, you can tell by reading it that he asked for people to do him favors like, remember me when I'm in here. I went out of here. This is hard. He went from bad to worse. And then finally, there comes a day when it says sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials and the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody of the house of the captain of the guard, of the chief executioner, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph and attended them. And each of these guys, cupbearer and the baker, they have dreams. And they come to Joseph, and Joseph said, hey, what'd you dream? And he interprets their dream, and he says to the cupbearer, hey, your dream means that everything's going to be okay, and Pharaoh's going to take you back in, everything's going to be awesome, you're going to live. The baker, he says to him, your dream means you're going to die. Everything's going to be a total drag. But he tells him the truth. So that's the end of that act. And finally, third act, I would say fulfillment and forgiveness. Fulfillment and forgiveness. So what happens, and for those of you who know the story, the Pharaoh, 2 years after this fact, The cupbearer is back. He's by the king, and the Pharaoh has a terrible dream about something that's going to happen, and he remembers there was a guy I met in prison. Go get him. And Joseph shows up before the Pharaoh, and he interprets the dream, and it's 7 years of prosperity. The stock market's going to go up. Everything's going to be amazing. It's going to be awesome, but it's going to be followed by 7 years where the stock market's going to crash, and things are going to be terrible, and you'd better save up during those 7 years for the next. And so he puts Joseph in charge of it, and he's feeding the whole world, and he finally is out of there, and that's when his brothers come in, and they're restored to him. And it's really, really fascinating that he says, he's right there in front of his brothers, been messing with their mind. I'm going to read this again. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life. That's why this distress is coming on him. And I love this. They're all standing there before him. They don't know who Joseph is. And Reuben, remember him? He was the first brother. Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using the interpreter. See, then it's true life stuff. There's a bunch of brothers. I told you. I've been telling you for 20 years. You guys did not listen to me. Now look where we are. Hopefully you can relate just a little bit. But then finally Joseph says this. And I love this scene. He finally reveals himself to them. And it intros this way. Joseph, he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him and Pharaoh's household heard about it. He wept so loudly. That's what I love about him. When he finally reveals himself, he had carried this burden for years. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said to them, I am your brother Joseph, the one who sold you into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve you a remnant on the earth and save your lives by a great deliverance. Okay, well, that's the story. That's getting in the time machine. Hopefully you're in it. Now, what is the second thing we do? We look for the shadows. Look for the shadows. Some scholars argue that there's as many as 100 different pointers to Jesus' life through Joseph's life. And I'm not going to give you all 100, okay? Don't panic. But I am going to give you what I call the top 10, just pointers to Jesus, because that's what we're leading up to. Think about these. Number one, the first characteristic of his life is that he was loved by his Father. He was loved by his Father. Whenever there were different occurrences in Jesus' life when a voice was heard from heaven, and the voice heard from heaven was heard from everybody else around him, that it always identified him, this is my son whom I love. This is my son whom I love. Second one is this. He was hated by and rejected by his brothers. Joseph's brothers represent, you've heard of the 12 tribes of Israel. His 12 brothers represented them, and they rejected him wholesale, and the Gentiles received him. That's the pattern of Jesus' life. Number three, he was a victim of unjust suffering. The death on the cross is by definition unjust. It is the righteous, innocent one being killed for the guilty. Number four, this is an interesting one. You don't have to buy it, but I thought it was kind of cool. One guy pointed out his blood was presented to his father. In other words, what the brothers did was that they didn't say, hey, Dad, that one you love more than any of us, we sold him into slavery. They didn't do that. They just said, they made it look like he had died, and they presented his blood before his father. Number five, this is interesting. I don't know if you caught this or not, but he was sold for silver. He was sold for pieces of silver, just like Jesus was. Number six, he lived and acted as if only God is watching. He lived and acted as unto God. Jesus, if there's a message that he repeated more than any other one, it was don't be a hypocrite. Live as unto God, not for the pleasure of people, not to impress people or any of that kind of stuff. Live as unto God. That was Jesus' marker. Number seven, the cupbearer and the baker. The cupbearer and the baker. Did you catch those guys? In our Shadows series, that bread and wine thing keeps coming up over and over and over again. That sound familiar? Bread and wine, bread and wine, bread and wine, baker and cupbearer. Number nine, number eight, he saved the world. He saved the world. He said, God used this to save the world. Number nine, he saved the world through bread. He was actually feeding, and Jesus cried out and said, I am the bread of life. And finally, number 10, he was humbled to the lowest and raised to the highest. He was humbled to the lowest, but raised to the highest. Did you catch that? Joseph went all the way down from the bottom, from loved by the Father to his brothers, and he was raised up to the most powerful man in the world, period. That's the pattern of Christ. Then what you do is you take both the time machine and the shadows, and then let's reread what the book of Romans says about why these stories are there. Everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. I don't know if you saw this or not, it was pretty big news this past week. The Center for Disease Control said about our country that our life expectancy is going down rather than up. Of the top 10 wealthiest nations of the world, of which we are number 1, we have the lowest life expectancy. And they said, they lay the charge at 2 basic problems that we have right now. They said last year alone, drug overdose deaths went up by 10%. 10. Suicides, or just under 10. Suicides went up by just under 4%. I was reading somebody following up on that, and they said since 1999, suicide rates in the United States have gone up by 30%. 30%. Now, I've struggled with both of those things, both drugs and suicidal stuff. And I can tell you this, at the root of it is the absence of hope, and the absence of meaning, and the absence of hope especially. Especially when you're suicidal, the reason you do it is because you don't see any exits. My only exit that I can come up with in my head out of this situation, out of the pain I'm in my life, out of the meaninglessness I'm in my life, is I'm just out. That's why it happens. And it's going up and up and up so much that it's marking our overall life expectancy. You don't have any hope. Now here's what I know. Watch this story. Think about hope for a minute. As you look at Joseph's life, one of the things we need to remember is the scale. He was 17 years old when he was taken in captivity. You know how long it took before he became the prime minister of Egypt? 13 years. 13 years. He didn't encounter his brothers for another time. He was for 20 years. And things went from good to bad to worse. And it was a 13-year thing. Now, he didn't know, first we didn't know a couple things. He didn't know he was going to become prime minister of Egypt. And I'm not saying you're going to become prime minister of Egypt. I don't know if it's a very good job anyway, I don't know. But I can say, none of us knows exactly where God's taken us, and also none of us knows exactly how he's getting us there. But if you're in Joseph's shoes, and you're watching this thing from inside a prison, and you're watching it over a 13-year period, can you imagine how discouraging that got every now and then? And you see it inside the story. He'll say to those around him, hey, remember me. Remember me. Some of you might be in year 1 of a 13-year run. But I want you to remember hope, because here's the other thing that Joseph did not know. Joseph not only, he didn't know the scale in his own lifetime, he didn't know the ultimate scale. He didn't know he was going to be a type of Christ. He didn't know that his story was going to be told 3,000 years later by preachers yelling a lot. But isn't that amazing? None of us knows what God ultimately wants for us. And we certainly don't know how he's going to get us there. And some of the stuff that he does, let's go ahead and admit it. I can't make sense out of some things that I know I've been through. It doesn't make any sense, and it's very easy to think, I'm justified just to jump off. I'm justified just to jump off. Don't you dare do it. Why? Because of Jesus' resurrection, he is our hope. He's our hope in the face of death. And either in this life or the next, if you are in Christ, if you are in him, you have hope. You have hope. You have hope. And you might be in year 1 of a 13-year run. But here's the other thing. Think about this. You might be in year 12 and 11 months. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. Why? Not because you're awesome, but because he's awesome. Because you don't know where he wants to take you ultimately, whether in this life or the next, and you don't know how he wants you to get there. But if you're in him, you're promised you are joint heir with Jesus. Don't you dare give up hope. Now here's how we're going to do this. I'm just going to challenge at each of our campuses in here, at our East Campus and in Henderson and West. I'm going to ask our prayer team members just to go to where they are. Need to go to where they are. That made a lot of sense. And what I want to dare you to do today is if your hope lines are in the dirt, allow yourself to be prayed for today. Just admit, I don't know, I went through something recently, my hope is just gone. I hate this and I don't understand it. Allow yourself to be prayed for. And for all of us to see on the scale, because the Bible says that if you're in Christ, none of your work, none of your life, none of it is in vain. It's all hopeful and filled. I'm going to hand things off to our campuses at this time.